Hello and welcome to the Interchange Book 3 Unit 9 video for the passive voice for services. So today we're going to be talking about a special type of passive voice that we use especially for services. But first, let's review what the passive voice is. Now, let's look at an active voice sentence. So here's my sentence. It says, "My boss fired me." Now, remember the active voice uses the subject as the doer. Now, in this context, my boss is doing something in the sentence, so he is the doer and the subject. Then my boss fires me, so my boss does something, he fires me, and me is the receiver, okay? But remember in the passive voice, we change the order of the active voice, and we want to talk about the receiver first. So, the passive voice would be, I was fired by my boss. Okay? So remember that in the passive voice, we're always using be plus a past participle. So we change the verb a little bit. So in this context, I'm using was and the past participle fired. Now, was is the past tense. Just like up here, fired is the past tense, I need to use the past tense of be. I was fired by my boss. Okay? Now, let's think about why. Why do we use the passive voice? Well, the biggest reason is that the receiver is more important than the doer. So, for example, if I say he was killed by a car crash, the person involved is more important than the actual car crash. So I talk about that first. So that's why I use the passive voice. The other reason I use the passive voice is that the doer is obvious. So, for example, if I say, coffee is grown in Costa Rica by farmers, right? The farmers is obvious. That I don't need to talk about. So if I don't need to talk about the doer, it makes sense to talk about the receiver first, okay? The other reason why I talk about the receiver first is maybe the doer is unknown. So, for example, the bank was robbed yesterday by someone, right? Now, I don't need to tell you by who if I don't know who it was. Or maybe it's obvious. Or maybe it's not important. But for all of these reasons, we use the passive voice. Now, let's take a look at a different type of passive voice. A passive voice with get. So if we remember my example in the active voice, my boss fired me yesterday, okay? I can say that in the passive voice using be, if we remember. I'd say, I was fired yesterday by my boss. And I'm using the verb be. In this case, it's the past tense, was. But I can also use the verb get. So just like I use the verb be, I can use the verb get. And I can say, I got fired yesterday by my boss. So when I use get, it's the same as using be. I can use get for three different types of passive voice. The first type is an uncontrolled action. So for example, my boss fired me. That was something I couldn't control. I can say, I got fired yesterday. Or maybe a negative situation. Again, this example is negative. I can say, I was fired. Or I can say, I got fired. And the last reason is for services, which is what our focus is today. But let's take a closer look at what I'm talking about when I say an uncontrolled action. So again, using get plus the past participle, I can use this for uncontrolled actions. For example, in the active voice, I say, my work pays me every 2 weeks, right? But I don't control this, and I can use a passive voice sentence with get, and I can say, I get paid every 2 weeks. And again, by my work is not important, it's obvious, I don't need to say it. But let's notice that in my active sentence, I'm saying my work pays me. I'm using the present tense there. Now in the passive voice, again, I'm using I get in the present tense, and then the past participle paid. So I get paid every 2 weeks, okay? So that's an example of an uncontrolled action. Now let's look at a negative type of situation using get plus the past participle. For example, in the active voice, the storm damaged my house. And again, I'm using this in the active voice, and I'm in the past tense now. The storm damaged my house. Now, in the passive voice using get, my house got damaged by the storm. So, just like I'm using damaged in the past, I'm using got in the past tense. And that controls my verb tense. But I'm using the past participle damaged here. Remember, that's the past participle. Okay? So, my house got damaged by the storm is an example of a negative type of situation where we can use get plus the past participle. And our last situation where we can use get as the passive voice, we talk about services done by another person. So for example, in the active voice, the mechanic is fixing my car. Okay? So notice my verb tense is in the present continuous. The mechanic is fixing my car right now. And if I want to say this in the passive voice, it's a service, I can say, well, my car is getting fixed by the mechanic. So again, I'm using get in the present continuous. My car is getting fixed by the mechanic, and fixed is the past participle. Okay? Always using the past participle. But let's take a look at a very, very specific type of passive voice for services. Now, I can use get and have to talk about services provided by another person. Okay? Now, this is the formula. I talk first about the person who needs the service. So if it's me, or if it's my friend, or if it's someone else, that's the person I talk about first. Then I use my verb get, or I can use the verb have, and there's no difference between those. Then I talk about the object, or the receiver of the action. What is the receiver? And then I use the past participle, and that's the action of the sentence. So, if I think about this question, who cleans your teeth? Who cleans your teeth? Well, if you want a professional service, you probably have a dentist, right? And you get your teeth cleaned by the dentist. So, I'm going to use this type of passive voice to talk about the service provided by a dentist. And I'm going to say, well, who needs the service? I. Then I can use my verb get or have. Then I use the receiver of the object, for example, my teeth. And then I use the past participle, the action, cleaned. So I say, I get my teeth cleaned, or I have my teeth cleaned, then by the dentist. But that part is extra. By the dentist is not always necessary. Okay? So this is the passive voice for services using the verb get or have. Let's take a look at some examples of this. For example, I needed my photo for my passport. Now, I can say that I took my photo, but that's what this means, is that I took my photo. But that doesn't work if I need a passport photo. I need a professional service. So I'm not going to say this like that. Instead, I'm going to use my passive voice. So I needed my photo for my passport. Now the passive voice, I would say like this. I got my photo taken by a photographer. Or I had my photo taken by a photographer. So notice, I needed my photo. I'm talking in the past tense. So I'm going to use get and had in the past tense, like I'm doing here. Then, again, I use the receiver, which is my photo. Then the past participle and the action, taken. And the rest, by a photographer. So this is the passive voice for a service. For example, I got my photo taken by a photographer. Okay? Let's take a look at another one. For example, I need to cut my hair. My hair is a little bit long, and I need to cut it. Right? But if I say this, in the future, I'm going to cut my hair, it sounds like this. It sounds like you are actually going to be the person that cuts your hair. But most people don't do this. No. We get a professional service for this. It's a service. So we're going to use our passive voice in the future. And I'm going to say, I need to cut my hair. Well, I'm going to get my hair cut tomorrow. Or I'm going to have my hair cut tomorrow. So again, this is the future, and I'm using the future of get, or the future of have, and I'm saying I'm going to get, or I'm going to have, then the receiver, my hair, then the past participle, cut. So this is the future, but I'm still using my passive voice with get or with have. I'm going to get my hair cut tomorrow, or I'm going to have my hair cut tomorrow. Okay, our last example. So his car isn't working. His car isn't working. Now, I can say in the active voice, he is fixing his car, but that sounds like he's the person doing the work on his car. Well, if he's a mechanic, that's okay, but if he doesn't know anything about cars, we don't want to say that, because we don't want to say that he is the person fixing his car. No, that's a service. So, if I say his car isn't working, I can use my passive voice, keeping in mind I'm talking about right now, and I can say he is getting his car fixed by the mechanic, or he is having his car fixed by the mechanic. So again, I'm using the passive voice with get and have, but now it's in the present continuous. So I'm saying he is getting, or he is having. Then I use my receiver, his car, and then the past participle fixed. So he is getting his car fixed by the mechanic. Again, that's an example of a service provided by someone. So remember that when I'm using the passive voice, I can talk about get and have, and that's controlling when I'm talking about the present, the past, or the future, okay, and the examples we just showed. But we always use the person who needs the service, then the verb to get, or the verb have, then we talk about the object, then we talk about the past participle for the action, okay? So, I hope you got the grammar explained by this video. Again, a passive voice for service. You got the grammar explained. So, I hope this was helpful in understanding how we use the passive voice with get, but specifically how we use the passive voice for services. So, good luck, and thanks for watching.